Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing well. So first things first, I just wanted to say a big welcome and a thank you to everybody who has come to this channel since Lucy from Lucy the Reader gave me a shout out on Sunday. Yeah, she shouted me out on her Instagram. She put a few Insta stories about my channel and about my Instagram, and since then, been a bit mad. My subscriber count pretty much doubled overnight, which what? How did that happen? So I wanted to give a big thank you to Lucy and also to all of you who stopped by and thought, yeah, she seems like someone I'd want to subscribe to, so thank you very, very much for that. But today I am back to talk about Mr Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. I read this earlier in the month and I absolutely adored this book, so I wanted to do a little bit of a review and a discussion of it. Bernadine Evaristo is probably best known for her book Girl, Woman, Other, which came out last year and infamously tied with Margaret Atwood's The Testaments for the Booker Prize last year. And because of this recent recognition, I think a lot of her backlist has been getting a lot more attention and prominence, which I'm really, really glad to see. And recently I'd seen quite a few booktubers really shouting the praises of this particular book, so I decided I wanted to give it a try, and I'm so glad that I did. And for myself, I actually found that I preferred Mr Loverman to Girl, Woman, Other. Not that it's a competition, but you know, just to give you my own personal preference. And I think that could potentially be the case for other readers who come to this book, particularly if you weren't really a big fan of the jumping between lots of different perspectives that happens in Girl, Woman, Other. This largely focuses on one character, though we do have a second additional voice that we do see the perspective of. I think because of that choice to keep the number of perspectives limited, it means that you really get a lot of time to mull over those individual lives and stories. However, I think that you can also see how Mr Loverman was kind of a bit of a springboard for Girl, Woman, Other. I think Bernadine Evaristo has talked about how Mr Loverman did inspire that book in some ways. Like Girl, Woman, Other, you are seeing a story which is long and drawn out over multiple decades, and you have Bernadine Evaristo crafting these very real, lifelike characters in a short span of pages, arguably. Mr Loverman follows the story of 74-year-old Barrington Walker, or Barry as he's known to his friends. He emigrated from Antigua to England with his wife Carmel as part of the Windrush generation. By the beginning point of the novel, he and Carmel have been married for 50 years, but they are noticeably unhappily married. Their relationship is notably strained at this point, and Carmel knows that Barry has been cheating on her, but what she doesn't know is that Barry has been in a relationship with his best friend Morris since the boys were 14 years old. Mr Loverman follows Barry as he really tries to dig up the motivation and the courage to tell Carmel his true feelings and to divorce her so that he can spend the rest of his remaining years with his true love Morris. As you might be able to tell from the synopsis, Mr Loverman is much more of a character-focused piece than it is a plot-heavy one. And it's in Bernadine Evaristo's creation of these characters that this book really excels and gets under your skin because they are so well realised. I think what's really fantastic about Mr Loverman is that you are slowly but surely peeling back different layers of these different characters' lives. Chapter by chapter, new secrets, new revelations emerge to the forefront. Just when you get to a point with these characters where you think you have them figured out, you think you have the narrative in your head of these characters' lives figured out, a new secret will emerge and a new layer will be uncovered. And that way of storytelling really makes you believe that these characters are real, because people's lives generally do not fit into neat linear narratives that we are used to hearing. There are many different layers to people, there are many different facets to one individual personality, and there are many contradictions and fluctuations in people's lives. These characters do all have very distinct personalities. You can very easily pick them out and be like, oh yes, that is that character, but they are not two-dimensional. They are very much fully formed characters with real flaws. It would have been very easy for Bernadine Evaristo to kind of cast Barry as being like the protagonist, the hero of the story, who doesn't have these faults, but no, he is a very flawed character. It would have been very easy to make Carmel, you know, the silly, unassuming wife, or the pestering wife, you know, the clueless wife, but she is none of those things. All of these characters have faults and flaws and prejudices. They all say things that at points you're just like, no, what are you doing? What are you saying? But you understand totally how they got to their perspectives because Bernadine Evaristo lets you have that time to mull over their lives with them. We are unpeeling layer after layer of this relationship and this family's history. And through it, we are really able to see how Barry not being true to himself has really taken a toll on the entire family, not just on himself. And because of that, these characters are not just two-dimensional goodies and baddies. You understand where all of these characters are coming from, even if you don't always agree with their actions or agree with their inherent beliefs. There were three main themes that really popped out to me whilst I was reading them. That of education and how that links into the narrative. That of emigrating and assimilating into a new country, and this idea of whether or not you should play within a system or challenge the system. And the third theme being the relationships between different generations. And initially I kind of wanted to talk about these three different themes separately, but I found that they are so interlinked with each other that it was kind of hard to script that out. So there's going to be a bit of batting backwards and forwards between these three themes as I discuss more about this novel. So like I say, I think education plays a really prominent theme in this story, and that is evident in the way that Barry talks. It's something that will really smack you in the face the second that you pick up this book, is the way that Barry's perspective and his dialogue is just littered with different references, particularly references to do with history and literature. For example, when Carmel looks at him and she looks absolutely angry. She's not just angry, she looks like she's going to invade Poland, is how he describes her. When Barry and Morris go out and get drunk, they're not just describing it as going out and getting drunk, they're describing it as being akin to a bacchanal. And this is not just a sign of Barry's intelligence and of his education. I think also Bernadine Evaristo is making a commentary on the immigrant experience and how you often have to work twice as hard as an immigrant to prove yourself as worthy of being in a country. Barry's use of language is not just, a personality quirk. He's using it defensively in many ways. He is constantly flaunting his education on the page, telling us about all of these different courses that he has taken. Partially because, he wants everybody to know how smart he is, but also because he wants people to know that he is worthy of his space in the UK. Education is also used within the narrative of Mr Loverman to demonstrate Barry's fear of commitment. Something that is frequently brought up within the narrative is the fact that Barry has taken all of these short night classes, but he has never actually enrolled and got himself a 3-year degree. And this is a bit of a point of contention for Barry within the narrative, and something that Morris particularly picks up on. He has all of this education and all of this reading, but he has never actually sat down and committed to one subject and pursued it rigorously in the way that you would during a degree. And I think it's really right that Morris is the one who points this out, because at the same time that Barry is not wanting to commit himself to one subject matter and pursue it for a degree, he's also not been willing for so many years to commit himself to Morris. Barry never ever wants to label himself. He's got a real fear of that, which then leads into the other themes that I was talking about of assimilation and working within a system versus challenging the system. That is something that is brought up an awful lot during Mr Loverman. There is at many points during the novel a real conflict in Barry's mind between people who work within a system that is unfair and manage to get themselves to the top, and then people who challenge the system and really point out the flaws in it and protest. Barry always kind of pits himself against people who protest and say that a system should be fairer, because he has very, very much worked hard within a system that has been many times unfair to him. And to all extents and purposes, it's worked. He is wealthy. He has a home that he has bought himself. He has a wife and 2 children and a grandchild. He has all of these markers that he has made it in life and that he has worked within the system and done well, and yet he's unhappy. He has everything that he covets, but he doesn't have happiness. Yet at many points throughout the novel, he shows disdain and irritation for younger generations who do protest and say that systems are unfair. He kind of steps on the sidelines of the 1960s, 1970s protests, and further on in the 21st century, he kind of steps back and is kind of baffled at all of these young people coming up and saying that the system is unfair. And you have to question how much of that is irritation that these people are rocking the boat and trying to change a system that he's worked very hard to assimilate into, and how much of it is kind of a little bit of residual jealousy that these people are open about who they are and that they have labelled themselves as being against this system, when he himself is so afraid of being open and rocking the boat of his own life and his own family dynamic. Which then, once again, leads into the third theme of generational differences and relationships between the generations. In many ways, Barry has gotten to this point where he is 74 years old and is still not doing what he wants to do. He's still not with the man that he loves because of the people that he's grown up with, because of his own generation. He's been very much stuck into the same routine day after day, but he's also been very much stuck in like a quagmire of prejudices that have been afflicted upon him as a result of the people that he's grown up with. He has been brought up into this very, very conservative, very Christian, traditional values generation who view homosexuality as a sin. His upbringing has very much affected how he sees himself, and as I said in my wrap up about this book, there are so many instances of Barry using deprecating language towards himself, particularly about his sexuality. There is a very, very tense, fraught dinner party scene where there are multiple generations around the table, and Barry and the younger generations are very noticeably feeling awkward about this situation. And Barry is noticeably awkward through this dinner encounter because on the one hand, he can't really stand up to these people who he's grown up with, and he's also not very comfortable with aligning himself with the younger generations at the table. And on the other hand, if he says nothing, he really is denying himself who he really is. Throughout Mr Loverman, Barry is really trying to come to terms with different generations and his relationship to them, because his relationship to the younger generations in his life is very fraught and often very dismissive. We see at the beginning of the novel, for example, that his relationship to his daughters and to his grandson is really at a distance. He hasn't spent much time with them in the past few years. And you can't help but think that this has all been part of his like self-preservation strategy. He has become so insular and really hid himself from the world that he has not been able to become more open with younger people, and that he's kind of scared to really fully embrace younger generations who have these more open, accepting, progressive views than the generation that he grew up with, because it really leaves him exposed to telling the truth about his identity. And whilst Barry is very, very intelligent, very, very learned, he's often not very self-aware of when he is being completely hypocritical. There's a moment within the narrative where he criticises a younger person for throwing too many references into his speech and being too pretentious and trying to show off his education too much. And it's like, Barry, you? Really? You're gonna be the one to criticize this? Don't you see that you do the exact same thing? And he's kind of like, yeah, but it works when I do it so naturally. And we see throughout the story that it's as Barry starts to spend more time with the younger generations, his daughters and his grandson, that he really starts to get more confident in himself and embrace his identity. However, what I really like about Mr Loverman is that at the same time, whilst this is true, the younger generations in Mr Loverman are not perfect either. For example, Barry's youngest daughter is very, very flighty, kind of silly at some points, and she's not very realistic when it comes to business. However, she is very loving and she's very open. There is a lot that Barry is able to teach her when they have an open conversation with each other, but there's also a lot that his daughter can teach him. And as you can see in many, many ways, these three different themes of education and generations and assimilation and fighting the system all really do link together into this narrative. One will kind of spur on another, which will spur on another, and then that one will link you back to the first one. But these three themes all link very well to this overarching story and this overall message of Mr Loverman, of this story being this 74-year-old man, this elderly man, you know, learning to be much more self-aware and much more open and accepting of himself, and how when you are much more open and accepting of yourself, that can also lead to you being much more open and accepting of other people and just making your community a lot better. As you can kind of tell, it's a book that I've really still not been able to make proper eloquent, cohesive thoughts out of. There are so many different rabbit holes that this book has put me down, but I loved every second of reading it. I really think that other people should pick it up and enjoy it, because I think there's so much that you can dig into with this. It's a very complex, multi-layered story in actually what is quite a short package. I just really wanted to kind of shine a light on this book because I think it deserves all the praise that it's been getting. And yeah, I hope that many of you are inspired to pick this up as well. I hope that you're having a brilliant, brilliant day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.